Welcome to this special ILTV live broadcast. I'm Ladar Lazi, and it's nearly 4 p.m. in Israel and almost 9 a.m. in New York. In just a few moments, we will air Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's speech at the UN General Assembly. And his long-awaited speech comes after a turbulent week amid a new wave of unilateral recognitions of a Palestinian state that have swept throughout Europe. So far, at least 9 Western states have recognized a state of Palestine, among them France, Britain, Canada, Australia, and Portugal, as well as Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta, and Monaco. And ahead of his flight to the U.S., Netanyahu said his address would condemn global leaders for recognizing a state of Palestine and giving a reward to Hamas terrorism. Reports indicate he is expected as well to use many visual aids and props in his UN speech to remind the world of the October 7th massacre. Now, the Prime Minister touched down in New York yesterday, and already he's had a slew of meetings with world leaders on the sidelines of the General Assembly, leaders of Argentina, Serbia, and Paraguay. And Netanyahu is, of course, also set to meet U.S. President Donald Trump on his visit on Monday at the White House. Now, Netanyahu will speak in just a few moments. And by the way, he has reportedly instructed his speech to be broadcast throughout the Gaza Strip, perhaps to speak even directly to the Palestinian people. But before he begins, I'd like to invite our panel to break down the latest. So joining us now is Ruthie Blum, senior editor at JNS, and Ambassador Jeremy Issacharoff, former Israeli ambassador to Germany. Thank you both so much for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
So, Ruthie, let's start with you. You know, looking at this diplomatic tsunami, let's call it, of the past week, so many countries recognizing a Palestinian state. What is the significance of such a move?
Well, symbolically, it's very significant. In real terms, it's not significant at all because there is no such entity as Palestine. There's no leader. There's no government. There's no governance. There's nothing that that characterizes statehood. So saying it doesn't make it so. It's very significant symbolically because what it shows is that even some of Israel's closest allies, or so-called allies, have come down firmly on the side of Israel's enemies. And it's not just Hamas they're rewarding. It's also the Palestinian Authority that pays for terrorism. The pay for slay has not ended, although they keep pretending that they're refunneling those funds for for prisoners for their health care or something like that. And the fact is that the only reason that the leader of the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas, the only reason that he's happy about saying, okay, we'll take over, we'll get the weapons away from Hamas, is because, for the same reason that he cooperates with Israel on certain security issues, because Hamas is his biggest rival and would win hands down in an election in the Palestinian Authority if such an election were held today.
So, Jeremy, will this have any real impact here on the ground? And how should Prime Minister Netanyahu respond to these recognitions now?
Well, look, as far as I'm concerned, I think that the recognition of a Palestinian state does not, in fact, change anything on the ground. And if anything, it evokes, to a certain extent, a reaction from right-wing Israelis who call for the annexation of the West Bank. And I would prefer to see calming down of the international community. I think this has been, as you said, a very turbulent week in diplomacy. We've seen all of these countries recognizing, which, while, as I agree with Ruthie, it doesn't have any major effect, but it has a lot of symbolic effect and maybe follow-up in terms of how Israel is being seen in the international community, of denying statehood, and that is as an accomplished fact. And I would obviously prefer that this whole issue of recognition will be reserved for any future negotiation between Israel and the Palestinians. Now, I would imagine that the Prime Minister, in his speech today, will, as is widely accepted, will come out with a very tough condemnation of those countries that have recognized the Palestinian state. He said in the last few days that Palestinian state is not on the table. This is not going to be part of the solution, and would still remain a threat to Israel's security. I think he will revisit very strongly the October 7th events. He will decry everything that the atrocities that Hamas has committed. He will also try and debunk a lot of the starvation, genocide accusations. And I think he'll use all of his rhetorical powers that I've seen personally in the UN to try and do this. But I think at the end of the day, people will be searching for the beginning of how Israel sees a vision, how it sees emerging from this incredible crisis that we faced over the last 2 years. And I think that is an important factor that we should take into account. And I hope that Prime Minister Netanyahu also takes it into account in his speech.
Ruthie, I want to hear your thoughts as well on what we can expect from Netanyahu's speech, which of course we'll hear in just a few moments. And, will this speech have any impact, or will it simply fall on deaf ears at the UN?
Well, first of all, I agree with everything that Jeremy said, other than the fact that, we want to reserve a Palestinian statehood for a future date when it can be negotiated with Israel, because I see a Palestinian state never happening. Maybe not never, but not in my lifetime for sure, because until you have at least one, if not two generations of Palestinians being educated not to want to kill Jews and annihilate Israel, there is no point. And there is no point in such an entity declaring statehood, since it doesn't want statehood. It wants to eliminate the Jewish state. That's number one. Number two, I think that it was that Netanyahu was happy to go after Trump at the UN, because President Trump did sort of give permission, I'll say in air quotes, to excoriate the UN in a way that perhaps Netanyahu, with his rhetorical skills, would have. He's always very tough. But what he isn't is he's not sloppy about, let's say, hurling insults and things like that. And Trump just let it rip. I was very thrilled with that, of course. He let it rip in every possible way, warning European countries that they're in decline and they're killing themselves, and that the whole UN is a joke, and global warming and green energy, they're hoaxes. So I think what he did was give some kind of permission for Netanyahu to be a little more specific in his serious criticism of Western countries in particular that have come out in this horrific way, and they have been against Israel for pretty much for most of the past 2 years, not all. I mean, when 1,200 Jews were slaughtered, not only Jews, there were others as well, slaughtered, and 250 Israelis taken captive, there was 5 minutes when the world said, oh dear, this is awful, because the world always used to love dead Jews. But it didn't take long for the tables to turn and for Israel to be accused of war crimes. And then there was the whole starvation campaign, etc. And unfortunately, the trouble was that the mediators for getting the hostages out were Qatar and Egypt. And Qatar is even worse than Egypt. Israel has a peace treaty with Egypt, although Egypt was the one allowing all the materials into Gaza to build all those tunnels. And Qatar is Hamas, not only housing Hamas, but Qatar funds terrorism around the globe, and also mainly funds insurrections at universities around the world. So those were the mediators, the negotiators. So Israel was always in a difficult position. And it's true there is internal pressure, but I just want to make one last point about the internal pressure. And that is that the very same people who say that, there's no vision for the day after, Netanyahu has no vision. He stated his vision right from the beginning, to get all the hostages out, to defeat Hamas or disarm Hamas, and to rebuild Gaza without Hamas. Okay, he said that all along. I noticed that the people who say he has no vision also are the same people who said, okay, fine, let's just get him out. Let's agree to whatever Hamas wants, leave him in power, get the hostages out, and we'll worry about it later. Okay, so those very same people who are screaming about a vision really don't care about the vision as long as whatever Netanyahu is doing is attacked from all sides. And so I think that that what we're going to see is the more important meeting here is not his speech at the UN, but his meeting with Trump at the White House.
So we'll get to the meeting with Trump in a moment. But Jeremy, I want to ask you, you are a veteran, a diplomat, a seasoned diplomat, and Israel, it's clear that in the United Nations, Israel is sort of a lone voice with the United States, perhaps. Incredible bias that Israel faces at the UN. Why stay in this organization, which is so clearly biased against Israel? I mean, why not simply pull out of the UN and refuse to play this game?
Because having been the political advisor to Ambassador Netanyahu in the 80s in the UN delegation in New York, and going through a very, very tough time, I always believed that Israel has to stand its ground, make its case, and push back. I don't agree that we should decide to leave every international organization because it's getting tough and because people don't like our positions. It does mean that we need to present, serious policies that relate to the issues on the ground in a serious way. And we've been able to do that up till now. And we've been able actually, and I remember over the 42 years that I served in the Foreign Service, to actually counteract and prevent very hostile acts towards Israel. So it's not as if we're in an organ. I'm not going to defend the UN. I think there's a tremendous amount of bias, but there are actually, with all the difficulties in the UN, Israel does have a lot of friends, and you'd be surprised to understand and know who these friends can be from many different areas. Again, it means that we need to engage, and I think that that's a very critical factor that we need to also employ at this point. And I think that I agree that the speech is, look, it's towards the end of the general debate in the General Assembly. I don't know how many world leaders will actually be around in the room. And, you usually have the walkout. But, I still think it's important that the Prime Minister of Israel does make a very clear statement as to what Israel is facing, the dilemmas, and what the challenges are. Now, will I agree necessarily with all the way Netanyahu presents it? Maybe not. Probably I would like to see, actually, and Ruthie, I didn't necessarily say that we have to have a two-state solution tomorrow, but I do believe that we have to emerge from having almost 2,000 people dead over 2 years in a seven-front war. I think we have to have a very serious political vision of how we want to move the Palestinian-Israeli process forward in a political sense. We need that in order to maintain our relations with Egypt and Jordan, which have both been strained. We need it to keep the Abraham Accords, which I think together are major national security interests of Israel. If we can create a situation where Saudi Arabia can come into the picture, and one of the things that'll be interesting to see is if Netanyahu talks about the recent discussions with Syria and the degree to which there could be some sort of breakthrough, at least a series of strategic or security understandings with Syria. I think, we need, as a country, also not only to see for our own people a sense of a greater opportunity of Israel in the area, but we need to present that opportunity to the world as a whole. And it's important that we do talk maybe later on about the meeting with Trump and the 21 points that I think Witkoff already has, they've already spoken to the Arab Islamic leaders, and I'm sure it'll come up in the meeting in the White House. And Witkoff has, I think, already briefed the Prime Minister on this. And it's really important. But I also don't forget one thing, it was very, I think, telling yesterday Trump said, if I'm quoting him correctly, I will not allow Israel to annex the West Bank. This is a very tough statement towards Israel, and I think the meeting in the White House will be very important to see how these issues are going to be ironed out. And I don't see the Prime Minister making any statements on the 21 points before that meeting.
Yeah. So I do want to address the meeting with Trump, and of course, we'll do that after the speech looking forward. Prime Minister Netanyahu is set to take to the podium really any minute. But before he does, Ruthie, I just want to hear from you. There's a big to-do here in Israel over a report that Netanyahu's speech will actually be broadcast throughout Gaza. Now, there's a lot of sort of controversy over this. What do you make of this report?
Well, first of all, there's a technical problem, and it was very, very hard to hear what you actually just said. So I don't know what question you were asking.
I'll repeat just quickly that there is a report that Netanyahu's speech will be broadcast today throughout the Gaza Strip. And it's caused quite a bit of controversy here in Israel. So what do you make of this?
No, I still couldn't hear a word that you said. There is a technical problem. Jeremy, are you also hearing that problem?
Unfortunately, I am. Yes, I didn't understand anything, I'm afraid.
It's totally broken up.
Can you hear me now?
No.
No.
It's choppy.
Okay, so we seem to have some sort of a technical difficulty. I don't know if you guys can hear me now. I don't know if the viewers can hear me. Can you hear me? Ruthie and Jeremy? Or is it still choppy?
It's still no good.
Still very garbled.
Okay. Ruthie, do you want to go ahead? Bibi is set to take to the podium in just a moment. And so we'll get this technical issue fixed as we wait for Netanyahu to take to the podium and begin his speech, which should begin at any moment. Nishma. Okay, so our guests are having a little bit of technical difficulties hearing me, but I understand that our viewers can hear me just fine. So in a few moments, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu will take to the podium to address the UN General Assembly, and we're going to broadcast that speech in its entirety live here on ILTV. And once that's concluded, we'll return to our panel of guests to discuss and break down the speech and, of course, Bibi Netanyahu's upcoming visit to the White House with Trump, the 21-point plan that's on the table, and all of the events of the past week with Palestinian state recognitions and more. So Netanyahu is expected to address all of this just in a few moments.
The plenary meeting
has already said that his address is going to include a condemnation of global leaders for recognizing a state of Palestine. For those just joining us, at least 9 Western states just this week recognized a Palestinian state, among them France, Britain, Canada, Australia, Portugal, Belgium, Luxembourg, Malta, and Monaco. And the Prime Minister, of course, is also set to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump on this visit after his speech at the UN. He's going to be spending the weekend in New York, and on Monday he is scheduled to meet with President Trump at the White House. And before our guests disconnected, we were speaking about this report here in Israel. It's causing a lot of controversy that Prime Minister Netanyahu reportedly instructed his speech to be broadcast throughout the Gaza Strip. And here we see Bibi Netanyahu, Prime Minister of Israel, taking the podium at the UN General Assembly. So we're going to turn to him now for his much anticipated
order
speech.
in the hall. Please, order in the hall. Please, order in the hall.
And we're seeing now the walkout of diplomats. This happens every time
Please, order in the hall.
Israel takes to the podium at the UN. We're seeing a number of diplomats walking out in protest over Israel, over Netanyahu. Many of these diplomats and many of these countries do not have relations with Israel, so this is not much of a surprise here. So as soon as they'll finish their walkout, Netanyahu will likely begin his speech.
Please, order in the hall, and please be seated. Please, order in the hall.
No, it's terrible.
It's really bad.
Mr. President,
Will we be able to hear the
the
speech?
families of our dear hostages languishing in the dungeons of Gaza,
Can't hear the speech.
ladies and gentlemen,
Man.
last year I stood at this podium and I showed this map. This map. It shows the curse of Iran's terror axis. This axis threatened the peace of the entire world. It threatened the stability of our region and the very existence of my country, Israel. Iran was rapidly developing a massive nuclear weapons program and a massive ballistic missile program. These were meant not only to destroy Israel, they were meant also to threaten the United States and blackmail nations everywhere. From Gaza, Yahya Sinwar dispatched waves of Hamas terrorists. They stormed into Israel on October 7th and committed acts of unspeakable savagery. From Lebanon, Hassan Nasrallah had launched thousands of missiles and rockets at our cities, terrorizing our citizens. In Syria, the murderous dictator Assad hosted Iran's forces, tightening a noose of death around our throats. In Yemen, the Houthis launched ballistic missiles at Israel while choking global trade at the mouth of the Red Sea. So what's happened over the past year? We've hammered the Houthis, including yesterday. We crushed the bulk of Hamas's terror machine. We crippled Hezbollah, taking out most of its leaders and much of its weapons arsenal. You remember those beepers, the pagers? We paged Hezbollah. And believe me, they got the message. And thousands of terrorists dropped to the ground. We destroyed Assad's armaments in Syria. We deterred Iran's Shiite militias in Iraq. And most importantly, and above anything else that I could say to you or that we did in this past year, in this past decade, we devastated Iran's atomic weapons and ballistic missiles programs. So here's where things stand today. Half the Houthi leadership in Yemen, gone. Yahya Sinwar in Gaza, gone. Hassan Nasrallah in Lebanon, gone. The Assad regime in Syria, gone. Those militias in Iraq, well, they're still deterred. And their leaders, if they attack Israel, will also be gone. And for Iran's top military commanders and its top atomic bomb scientists, well, they're gone too. Israel's 12-day war with Iran, which I renamed Operation Rising Lion, that's from the Bible. This 12-day war will go down in the annals of military history. Our daring pilots neutralized Iran's missile defenses and took control of the skies over Tehran. And you saw this. Israeli fighter pilots and American B-2 pilots bombed Iran's nuclear enrichment sites. I want to thank President Trump for his bold and decisive action. President Trump and I promised to prevent Iran from developing nuclear weapons, and we delivered on that promise. We removed an existential threat to Israel, and a mortal threat to the civilized world. We lifted a dark cloud that could have claimed millions and millions of lives. But, ladies and gentlemen, we must remain absolutely clear-minded and vigilant. We must not allow Iran to rebuild its military nuclear capacities. Iran's stockpiles of enriched uranium, these stockpiles must be eliminated. And tomorrow, UN Security Council sanctions on Iran must be snapped back. Thanks to the resolve of our people, the courage of our soldiers, and the bold decisions we took, Israel rebounded from its darkest day to deliver one of the most stunning military comebacks in history. But we're not done yet. The final remnants of Hamas are holed up in Gaza City. They vow to repeat the atrocities of October 7th again and again and again, no matter how diminished their forces. That is why Israel must finish the job. That is why we want to do so as fast as possible. Ladies and gentlemen, much of the world no longer remembers October 7th. But we remember. Israel remembers October 7th. On that day, well, I'll tell you, you can remember October 7th too. You see this large pin here? It's a QR code. What I ask you to do is hold up your phones, zoom in, and you too will see why we fight and why we must win. It's all in here. On October 7th, Hamas carried out the worst attack on Jews since the Holocaust. They slaughtered 1,200 innocent people, including over 40 Americans and foreign nationals from dozens of countries represented here. They beheaded men. They raped women. They burnt babies alive. They burnt babies alive in front of their parents. What monsters. And these monsters took more than 250 people hostage. And those included Holocaust survivors, grandmothers and their grandchildren. Who takes hostage grandmothers and grandchildren? Hamas does. So far, we've brought home 207 of these hostages, but 48 still remain in the dungeons of Gaza. 20 of them are alive, starved, tortured, deprived of any daylight, deprived of humanity. These are the names of the 20 living hostages. Matan Angrest, Gali and Zerv Berman, brothers, Elkanah Buchbot, Rom Braslavsky, Nimrod Cohen, Ariel and David Cunyo, another pair of brothers, Guy Gilboa Dalal, Eviatar David. You saw the picture of Eviatar David, emaciated, forced to dig his own grave. Maxim Herkin, Eitan Horn, Segev Kalfon, Bar Kuperstein, Omri Meran, Eitan Mor, Yosef Chaim Ochana, Alon Ohel, Avinatam Or, and Matan Tsengarker. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I want to do something I've never done before. I want to speak from this forum directly to those hostages through loudspeakers. I've surrounded Gaza with massive loudspeakers connected to this microphone in the hope that our dear hostages will hear my message. And I'll say it first in Hebrew and then in English. אחינו הגיבורים, מדבר ראש הממשלה בנימין נתניהו. אני פונה עליכם מעל בימת האו"ם. לא שכחנו אתכם, אפילו לא לשנייה. העם כולו איתכם, ואנחנו לא נשקוט ולא נרפה עד שנחזיר את כולכם הביתה. החיים והחללים כאחד. Our brave heroes. This is Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking to you live from the United Nations. We have not forgotten you, not even for a second. The people of Israel are with you. We will not falter and we will not rest until we bring all of you home. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks to special efforts by Israeli intelligence, my words are now also being carried. They're streamed live to the cell phones of Gazans. So to the remaining Hamas leaders and to the jailers of our hostages, I now say, lay down your arms. Let my people go. Free the hostages, all of them, the whole 48. Free the hostages now. If you do, you will live. If you don't, Israel will hunt you down. Ladies and gentlemen, if Hamas agrees to our demands, the war could end right now. Gaza would be demilitarized, Israel would retain overriding security control, and a peaceful civilian authority would be established by Gazans and others committed to peace with Israel. And of course, you understand that the war in Gaza has affected every Israeli. But I'm sure there are people in New York or in London or in Melbourne and elsewhere who are probably thinking, what does all of this have to do with me? And the answer is everything. Because our enemies are your enemies. So let's do something else first at the UN. Let's do a pop quiz. And raise your hand if you know the answer. Here's the first question. Who shouts, "Death to America"? Is it A, Iran, B, Hamas, C, Hezbollah, D, the Houthis, or E, all of the above? All of the above. Correct. All of the above. Second question. Who has murdered Americans and Europeans in cold blood? Is it A, Al-Qaeda, B, Hamas, C, Hezbollah, D, Iran, or E, all of the above? Correct. Again. So here's the point I wanted to make. Our enemies hate all of us with equal venom. They want to drag the modern world back to the past, to a dark age of violence, fanaticism, and terror. I think many of you are already feeling in your own societies the radical Islamist surge. You know, I'm sure you do, you know deep down that Israel is fighting your fight. So I want to tell you a secret. Behind closed doors, many of the leaders who publicly condemn us privately thank us. They tell me how much they value Israel's superb intelligence services that have prevented time and again terrorist attacks in their capitals, time and again saving countless lives. General George Keegan, former head of U.S. Air Force intelligence, once said, "If the United States had to gather on its own the intelligence that Israel gives us, we would have to establish 5 CIAs. 5 CIAs. This past June, when Israel struck Iran's nuclear facilities, German Chancellor Merz admitted the truth. He said, Israel is doing the dirty work for all of us. President Trump understands better than any other leader that Israel and America face a common threat. He showed the world that when Iran and its proxies murder Americans, take Americans hostage, shout death to America, burn American flags, and try to assassinate the President of the United States, not once, but twice. He showed them there is a price to pay for all that. But regrettably, many leaders who are represented in this hall, they send a very different message. Sure, in the days immediately following October 7th, many of them supported Israel. But that support quickly evaporated when Israel did what any self-respecting nation would do in the wake of such a savage attack. We fought back. Now just imagine, just sit back for a second and imagine an attack against America proportioned to the attack against Israel on October 7th. Imagine a regime, a terror regime, dispatching thousands of terrorists to invade the United States. They massacre 40,000 Americans. They take 10,000 Americans hostage. What do you think America would do? You think America would leave that regime standing? No way, not a chance. The United States would wipe out that terror regime and ensure that such savagery would never threaten America again. This is precisely what Israel is doing in Gaza. We're wiping out the terror regime of Hamas and ensuring that this savagery will never threaten Israel again. That's what we are doing. That's what any self-respecting government would do. Yet, and it's a yet that I'm sorry to say here, yet over time, many world leaders buckled. They buckled under the pressure of a biased media, radical Islamist constituencies, and anti-Semitic mobs. There's a familiar saying, when the going gets tough, the tough get going. Well, for many countries here, when the going got tough, you caved. And here's the shameful result of that collapse. For much of the past 2 years, Israel has had to fight a seven-front war against barbarism with many of your nations opposing us. Astoundingly, as we fight the terrorists who murdered many of your citizens, you are fighting us. You condemn us, you embargo us, and you wage political and legal warfare, it's called lawfare, against us. I say to the representatives of those nations, this is not an indictment of Israel. It's an indictment of you. It's an indictment of weak-kneed leaders who appease evil rather than support a nation whose brave soldiers guard you from the barbarians at the gate. They're already penetrating your gates. When will you learn? You can't appease your way out of jihad, and you won't escape the Islamist storm by sacrificing Israel. To overcome that storm, you have to stand with Israel. But that's not what you're doing. As the prophets of Israel foretold in the Bible, you've turned good into evil and evil into good. Now I want to drill down on this. Take the false charge of genocide. Israel is accused of deliberately targeting civilians. Ladies and gentlemen, the opposite is true. The head of urban warfare studies, Colonel John Spencer, he's perhaps the world's greatest expert on urban warfare. And he says, Israel is applying more measures to minimize civilian casualties than any military in history. And because we're doing that, the ratio of non-combatant to combatant casualties is less than 2 to 1 in Gaza. That's an astoundingly low ratio, lower than NATO's wars in Afghanistan and Iraq, especially when you consider that Gaza is one of the most densely populated urban areas on Earth. It has hundreds of miles of terror tunnels underground, and it has countless terror towers above ground, and thousands of terrorists embedded in the tunnels and in these towers in civilian areas. If you want to see what measures Israel takes to avoid civilian casualties in this war, just look at what we're doing now in Gaza City, the last Hamas stronghold, one of the 2 last strongholds. For 3 weeks, Israel dropped millions of leaflets, sent millions of text messages, and made countless phone calls urging civilians to leave Gaza City before our military moves in. At the same time, Hamas implants itself in mosques, schools, hospitals, apartment buildings, and tries to force those civilians not to leave, to stay in harm's way. And it often threatens them at gunpoint if they try to do so. For Israel, every civilian casualty is a tragedy. For Hamas, it's a strategy. Hamas uses civilians as human shields and as props in its sick propaganda war in Israel, against Israel, a propaganda war that the Western media buys hook, line, and sinker. Now, despite Hamas's threats, close to 700,000 Gazans, almost 750,000, have already heeded our calls and moved to safe zones. Now I want to ask you a simple question, a simple, logical question. Would a country committing genocide plead with the civilian population it is supposedly targeting to get out of harm's way? Would we tell them, get out, if we want to commit genocide? We're trying to get them out. And Hamas is trying to keep them in. And this charge is so baseless. The comparison to genocide, wholesale slaughter of populations. What, did the Nazis ask the Jews to leave, kindly leave, go out? Did others, you want me to name all the genocidal leaders of history? Just go one by one. Did anyone do this? Did they say, get out so we can come in? Of course not. So the truth has been turned on its head. Hamas, a genocidal terrorist organization whose charter calls for the murder of all Jews on the planet. This genocidal organization is given a pass. It's barely mentioned. While Israel, which does everything it can to get civilians out of harm's way, Israel is put in the dock. What a joke. You want to hear another one? Israel is accused of deliberately starving the people of Gaza when Israel is deliberately feeding the people of Gaza. Since the beginning of the war, Israel has let into Gaza more than 2 million tons of food and aid. That's 1 ton of aid for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. Nearly 3,000 calories per person per day. Some starvation policy. If there are Gazans who don't have enough food, it's because Hamas is stealing it. Hamas steals it, hoards it, and sells it at exorbitant prices to fight its war machine. Last month, even the UN, not exactly a supporter of Israel. You're supposed to laugh, by the way. Last month, even the UN admitted that Hamas and other armed groups looted 85% of the trucks. That's why you have deprivation. Those who peddled the blood libels of genocide and starvation against Israel are no better than those who peddled blood libels against the Jews in the Middle Ages when they falsely accused us of poisoning wells, spreading plague, and using the blood of children to bake Passover matzahs. Anti-Semitism dies hard. In fact, it doesn't die at all. It just keeps coming back with its libelous lies, refurbished, regurgitated over and over again. And I want to tell you something else. These anti-Semitic lies, they have consequences. In recent months, Jews have been assaulted in Canada, Australia, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and elsewhere. Here in America, an elderly Holocaust survivor was burned to death in Colorado. And a beautiful young couple from the Israeli embassy in Washington was brutally gunned down right in front of the Holocaust Museum there. Thankfully, President Trump's administration is forcefully fighting the scourge of anti-Semitism, and every government here should follow its lead. But instead, many do the opposite. They actually reward the worst anti-Semites on earth. This week, the leaders of France, Britain, Australia, Canada, and other countries unconditionally recognized a Palestinian state. They did so after the horrors committed by Hamas on October 7th. Horrors praised on that day by nearly 90% of the Palestinian population. Now, let me say that again. Nearly 90% of Palestinians supported the attack on October 7th. It's not supported only, they celebrated it. They danced on the rooftops. They threw candies. That's both in Gaza and in Judea, Samaria, the West Bank, as you call it. And it's just the way they celebrated another horror, 9/11. They danced on the They cheered, they candy. You know what message the leaders who recognize the Palestinian state this week sent to the Palestinians? It's a very clear message. Murdering Jews pays off. Well, I have a message for these leaders. When the most savage terrorists on earth are effusively praising your decision, you didn't do something right. You did something wrong, horribly wrong. Your disgraceful decision will encourage terrorism against Jews and against innocent people everywhere. It will be a mark of shame on all of you. But wait a minute, Mr. Prime Minister, they tell me. Wait a minute. We believe in a two-state solution where the Jewish state of Israel will live side by side in peace with the Palestinian state. There's only one problem with that. The Palestinians, they don't believe in this solution. They never have. They don't want a state next to Israel. They want a Palestinian state instead of Israel. And that's why every time they were offered a Palestinian state, but were required to end the conflict with Israel and recognize the Jewish state, every time, over the decades, they turned it down. And that is why every time they were given territory, they used it to attack us. In fact, they effectively had a Palestinian state in Gaza. So what did they do with that state? Peace? Coexistence? No. They attacked us time and time again. Totally unprovoked. They fired rockets into our cities. They murdered our children. They turned Gaza into a terror base from which they committed the October 7th massacre. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The persistent Palestinian rejection of a Jewish state in any boundary is what has driven this conflict for over a century. It is still driving it. It's not the absence of a Palestinian state. It's the presence and existence of a Jewish state. And I find it amazing, that the foreign chancelleries and the ministries and all those who pontificate about this, and the leaders, how can they not see this basic truth when it is repeated again and again and again ad nauseum? And I want to say something else. This rejection of a Jewish state not only applies to Hamas, it also applies to the so-called moderate Palestinian Authority. You should know that the Palestinian authorities pays terrorists to slay Jews. The more Jews the terrorists slay, the more the Palestinian Authority pays. The Palestinian Authority names its government buildings, its public squares, its schools, after the mass murderers of Jews, which they glorify as martyrs. They pay and glorify not just the killer of Jews, but also killers of Christians. Christians like Taylor Force, an American veteran who was brutally murdered in Israel by Palestinian terrorists. But, that I hear from the Western leaders. They tell me, the PA promised us it will reform. And I know this time, Prime Minister, it will be different. Yeah, right. We've heard these promises for decades. They always promise. They never deliver. Because you see, the Palestinian Authority is corrupt to the core. They haven't held elections in 20 years. They use the same textbooks as Hamas, exactly the same textbooks. They teach their children to hate Jews and destroy the Jewish state. And Christians don't fare much better. When Bethlehem, the birthplace of Jesus, was under Israeli control, 80% of its residents were Christians. But since the PA took control, that number has dwindled to under 20%. These are the people you want to give a state to? What you're doing is giving the ultimate reward to intolerant fanatics who perpetrated and supported the October 7th massacre. Giving the Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem after October 7th is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th. This is sheer madness. It's insane, and we won't do it. So here's another message to those Western leaders. Israel will not allow you to shove a terror state down our throats. We will not commit national suicide because you don't have the guts to face down a hostile media and anti-Semitic mobs demanding Israel's blood. And I want you to grasp something else, which is also distorted in the media. I say this not only in my name or the name of my government, but on behalf of all the people of Israel. Last year there was a vote in the Knesset, our parliament, whether or not to oppose the imposition of a Palestinian state. You want to guess what the results were? Out of 120 members of our parliament, 99 voted against and only 9 supported. That's over 90%. It's not a fringe group. It's not the prime minister who himself is extreme or he's held hostage by extreme parties to his right. It's over 90% of Israelis. My opposition to a Palestinian state is not simply my policies or my government's policy. It's the policy of the state and people of the state of Israel. Western leaders may have buckled under the pressure. And I guarantee you one thing, Israel won't. Israel's victories over the Iranian... Thank you, I know you won't too, that's good. Israel's victories over the Iranian terror axis have opened up possibilities for peace that were unthinkable 2 years ago. Take Syria. For decades, the very idea of peace between Israel and Syria seemed unimaginable. Well, no more. Today, we have begun serious negotiations with the new Syrian government. I believe an agreement can be reached that respects Syria's sovereignty and protects both Israeli security and the security of the minorities in the region, including the Druze minority. From the founding of Israel, Jews and Druze have been brothers in arms. We have fought together, we've bled together, we built our lives together. When I was a young commander in Israel's Special Forces, my own life was saved by the invaluable advice given to me by a great friend, Salim Shufi, a heroic Druze IDF veteran. And that's why I couldn't sit idly by, nor could Israel sit idly by, while the Druze were being slaughtered by jihadists. And I instructed our forces to stop the massacre, which they promptly did. Peace between Israel and Lebanon is possible as well. I call on the Lebanese government to also begin direct negotiations with Israel. I commend it for its declared aim to disarm Hezbollah. But we need more than words. If Lebanon takes genuine and sustained action to disarm Hezbollah, I'm sure we can achieve a sustainable peace. Of course, until that happens, we will take whatever action we need to defend ourselves and to maintain the conditions of the ceasefire which was established in Lebanon. Our goal is not merely to monitor Hezbollah's actions, but to prevent them from violating the ceasefire and attacking us at any time. But I'm sure that if the Lebanese government persists in its goal of disarming Hezbollah, peace will come very speedily and very readily. Victory over Hezbollah has made peace possible with our two Arab neighbors in the north. Victory over Hamas will make peace possible with nations throughout the Arab and Muslim world. Our victory would lead to a dramatic extension and expansion of the historic Abraham Accords, which President Trump brokered between Arab leaders and myself 5 years ago. And I took note, as I'm sure you did too, of the encouraging words spoken here by the President of Indonesia. This is the country with the largest Muslim population of all nations. And it's also a sign of what could come. Forward-looking Arabs and Muslim leaders know that cooperating with Israel will provide them with groundbreaking Israeli technologies, including in medicine and science, in agriculture and water, in defense and AI, and so many other fields. I believe that in the coming years, the Middle East will look dramatically different. Many of those who wage war on Israel today will be gone tomorrow. Brave peacemakers will take their place. And nowhere will this be more true than in Iran. The long-suffering Iranian people will regain their freedom. They will make Iran great again. And our two ancient peoples, the people of Israel and the people of Iran, will restore a friendship that will benefit the entire world. Ladies and gentlemen, the horrors that happened on one dark day, October 7th, those horrors happened countless times during the centuries of my people's exiles among the nations. Jewish blood was cheap. Jews were killed with impunity. We had to beg others to defend us. The rise of Israel did not mean that the attempts to destroy us would end. It meant that we could fight back against those attempts. And that is exactly what Israel has done since October 7th. Our sons and daughters fought like lions. Our brave soldiers donned their uniforms and rushed into battle. They were armed with the dreams of the 100 generations of Jews who came before them. The dream of living as a free people in the land of Israel, our beloved homeland for more than 3,000 years. The dreams of living in our own independent state. The dream of having an army to defend ourselves. And the dream of being a light unto the nations, a beacon of progress, ingenuity, innovation, for the benefit of all humanity. On October 7th, the enemies of Israel tried to extinguish that light. 2 years later, the resolve of Israel and the strength of Israel burned brighter than ever. With God's help, that strength and that resolve would lead us to a speedy victory and to a brilliant future of prosperity and peace. Thank you very much.
On behalf of the Assembly, I wish to thank the Prime Minister of the State of Israel.
Okay, and with that, Prime Minister Netanyahu's speech concluding at the UN General Assembly, he starts with describing Israel's achievements these past nearly 2 years since the October 7th massacre, the historic strike on the Islamic Republic of Iran, the beepers, pagers operation with Hezbollah, and of course, taking out Hamas's leadership. He also speaks directly to the hostages in Gaza. Before the speech, we mentioned that there were loudspeakers being put along throughout the Gaza Strip. And now we know why. Prime Minister Netanyahu speaking directly to the hostages, saying to them that Israel will never stop and not forget until they are freed. He also speaks directly to the people of Gaza. He said that their cell phones, that his speech was broadcast directly on their cell phones, and he calls on them to free all the hostages now. And he says if Hamas lays down its weapons and releases the hostages, the war will end. And of course, we certainly saw a lot of props. We saw a pop quiz in which people were actually answering him. And he also addressed the Palestinian state recognitions, and he certainly did not hold back against Western leaders. He called them out for rewarding terrorism. And he also talked about expanding the historic Abraham Accords in the near future. So all of that on his speech, and I want to turn back now to our panel. I hope that they can hear me. Ruthie, I want to start with you. First impressions, what did you think of his speech?
Well, I thought it was excellent, though I will say that he seemed a bit tired, more tired than usual, and I think it indicates that he was up all night preparing this and doing it very carefully. Also, I think the props, I know that some people find those props very helpful, but I personally, I would do without them. As for the text itself, I thought it was excellent. And I would say I was only slightly disappointed in the fact that though he did go after Western leaders and he said they should be ashamed of themselves for being on the wrong side, I would have liked to see something a little more belligerent. I would say the way President Trump delivered his speech. And finally, I'll say I understand that Netanyahu likes to end in an optimistic note, and he talks about expanding the Abraham Accords. One of the problems with that is that 2 years ago, right before, 2 weeks before the October 7th massacre, he made a beautiful speech about the Abraham Accords and, peace busting out all over the Middle East. And then we saw what happened. And to my great disappointment in the Abraham Accords countries, one of the beauties of those accords was that it showed that the road to peace in the Middle East does not go through the Palestinians. And the Abraham Accords countries acknowledged that basically by saying, okay, the Palestinians are welcome to join, but that's not necessary. And Hamas came along 2 weeks, 2 weeks after that speech, not after the Abraham Accords were signed. Those were signed in 2020. But they came along and basically undermined their own position about what it takes to have peace between Israel and Arab neighbors. And in that sense, I would have liked to see a little bit of reprimand there as well.
And I do want to also mention, he really spoke about October 7th and the atrocities, reminding the world of what took place, what Hamas did. He said that Hamas burned babies alive. And he also gave a startling statistic: 90% of Palestinians supported and celebrated October 7th. So, Jeremy, I want to turn to you now and also hear your first impressions of Netanyahu's speech.
Thanks, Lidar. Well, I guess as opposed to Ruthie, I thought this was a very belligerent speech. I think it will resonate very strongly with his base in Israel. I'm not sure that it would resonate very much with the middle ground, which is really the major battleground that we need to contend with in the diplomatic area. I think if I could say on the issue of Iran, which he raised, and it's an issue which is very close to my heart, I would be very cautious of saying that we've removed the existential threat of Iran. I was actually surprised that he was so categorical. I would still be very cautious of Iran, both in the nuclear and the missile areas. And by the way, I think the snapback should be reimposed. And this connects to what I want to say now, is that the snapback is also very conditional on France, UK, and Germany, European leaders that we should be engaging with and being very careful not to insult them. I mean, if you read very carefully or listen carefully to what he said, he basically accused the Western leaders of endorsing anti-Semitism and also approving the murder of Jews. And when you break this down into plain English, this ain't a message that's going to resonate with people that we need to come to talk to. I'm not saying give up Israeli national security interests to make other people happy. I want Israel to be happy, and for Israel to secure its national security interests in every possible way that is moral and legal and acceptable. But I think we need to be careful in terms of how we speak. Now, he did mention basically that the 5 points that would bring about the end of the war. I feel these 5 points of Hamas disarming and other civil administration in Gaza, I'm not sure that they convey a very clear message that can be implemented tomorrow. And the one thing that I think is disturbing was the fact that he said and basically equated the PA with Hamas, and if I'm not mistaken, with Al Qaeda. And I think, look, we do not have a lot of parties on the other side that we can talk to. And I have been very careful since the 7th of October not to say that, every Palestinian would have committed the murder and brutality of Hamas. And I don't think it's politically savvy to just connect all the Palestinians to Hamas. That's my opinion.
Well,
I
he
think
said 90% of Palestinians supported October 7th. That was a statistic that he
listen,
shared.
I also personally, the Palestinians that I speak to, I've been involved in a number of discussions with them, and I think 90% is, I'm not saying there isn't a number of Palestinians that support what happened. I think 90% is a very, very high number. And essentially, look, if up till now there was any speculation, does Netanyahu continue to adhere to the Bar Ilan speech of a two-state solution? And I don't want to get into whether it's feasible or not, and even if it would be, it would take many years to negotiate. But I think he finally, once and for all, buried the idea of a two-state solution. And that, again, is not something that's going to resonate well with the European countries. Now, I don't know if it's realistic or not, but do we need to negate every possible political solution that we know is important? And again, I think it brings us back to Monday when he sits with President Trump, who, if his conversations with the Arab countries conceive some political horizon, then we need to address that issue. And I would be hopeful to see how we can. But based on that
Right.
speech, I'm not sure that we have any answers.
So I do want to look ahead now to Netanyahu's upcoming visit with U.S. President Donald Trump. I do just want to say, you mentioned the Palestinian Authority. I do want to just mention that, they still employ a pay-for-slay policy. They're paying terrorists to murder Jews. So the analogy perhaps, or, sort of linking them together, he says, that many say that they're a partner for peace. That I think is debatable. But certainly you made a very interesting point that his words would not fall well on European ears. The question is, how will they fall with President Trump? So, Ruthie, let's talk now about this 21-point plan. From what we know so far, what do you make of this plan? And are there any red lines for Israel that Netanyahu will not be able to agree to?
Okay, well, I don't know what all the 21 points are, and I always tend to be skeptical about such plans, precisely because there is no partner on the other side. Certainly, there's a partner in the United States and some other more silent partners, I would say, in the Arab world. Silent at the moment because they're hedging their bets. They don't want to be too open about support for Israel. Even those who signed the Abraham Accords and say, suddenly Palestinian statehood. I'm always skeptical about it. By the way, I would just like to add to this that I was very happy that Netanyahu put a lid on a two-state solution in his Bar Ilan speech. I also agree that we can't just assume that we totally eliminated the Iranian threat, and I don't think that Netanyahu thinks we did. And I would say the same for Syria. We're talking a lot about these deals with Syria. We have to keep our powder dry because the new Syrian leadership is from Al Qaeda and ISIS, and I don't believe that they changed their stripes so quickly. As for the 21-point plan, it's possible that Jared Kushner and Steve Witkoff and Trump and Netanyahu have already been discussing this a lot behind the scenes, and maybe there are some of those points, the purpose of which is to enable Netanyahu to reject them the way you would do in any negotiation. That I'm not certain of. We know that President Trump said no annexation of the West Bank. He said that yesterday when he was asked by reporters, no, I'm not going to let you do it. There is speculation in Israel that this was coordinated with Netanyahu so that Netanyahu would be able to face his base and say, it's not my rejection of it, it's the White House. I don't know that that's true, but I do believe there's a lot more coordination between the White House and Netanyahu than we even know.
Jeremy, do you agree with that? Do you think that this is going to be a friendly visit? Are the two leaders still on the same page on events in Gaza, on the Islamic Republic of Iran? What are your thoughts?
Lidar, I'm sorry, your question was very garbled, but I'll try and answer what I think what you asked me. Look, I think again, I don't know what's in the 21 points that Witkoff, I think, did share with Netanyahu yesterday, and will obviously be discussed on Monday. But I think it's clear that we need if there have to be three, I think, essential points. Number one, the war ends. Two, all of the hostages have to be released, and I personally cannot say enough that I think it should be in one tranche and not this breaking up into various stages. We need all of the hostages back, otherwise, more important than anything else, whether the Palestinians, the West Bank, or anything, we as a country need to begin to heal. And I think if we continue to bear this horrific trauma of the hostages more, I think that, this is something that the Israeli society cannot, it's something that we have to reject for our own values and our own identity. So I think, this end the war, get the hostages back, and have some sort of political framework by which we can address the post-war situation, but not just in Gaza, also in the West Bank. How do we consolidate our relations with Egypt and Jordan, which have gone and are going through? Maybe it's not so much in the public eye, but one can sense there's pressures there and there's tensions in the relationship. We need to preserve the Abraham Accords, as I've said, and I'm sure that will be among the 21 points. How do you provide a gateway for the Saudis to come in and also other countries? And Netanyahu even mentioned the president of Indonesia, who shouted out shalom from the podium of the UN. And Indonesia is one of the most populous Islamic countries in the world, and I would not. I think there is a very great opportunity. Syria, I believe. I disagree with Ruthie. I felt from the beginning of this year that we need to try and exhaust all of the possibilities with Syria. If we can have a breakthrough with Syria, that can impact Lebanon. And if we can surround ourselves with Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, as a ring of potential peace and stability, as opposed to the ring of fire of Iran, I think that will be a great achievement. So I think, these will be the issues that will be addressed. Now, again, I have to say one thing. I don't think this opportunity is doable. I think it's there. I think it's realistic. But there has to be a realistic, credible Israeli-Palestinian component to it. Now, how we do that, that needs a lot of diplomacy. But if we think that we can take the Palestinian-Israeli element out of it and that everything will happen, all I can say is good luck. I hope it works out. But we do, in my opinion, need a Palestinian component.
And Ruthie, I want to turn to you now and ask, what do you think Bibi is hoping to get out of his meeting at the White House? What do you think he's hoping to walk away with from his meeting with Trump?
Well, if you're asking, again, because of this garbled sound, if you're asking about Netanyahu and Trump, whether they are still in lockstep about this whole issue, I would say that it's very, President Trump is unpredictable. One thing he has done all along has been extremely supportive of Israel, and his moral compass has been extremely clear about who the good guys and bad guys are in this conflict. However, Trump also, because he thinks that everything is a deal and you can make deals, sometimes he doesn't, I think, grasp the weight of ideology, religious, political ideology, that not everything can be dealt, so to speak. So I think that, and however, I do believe that Netanyahu knows how to talk to Trump, and that we're going to see after Monday what actually emerges from what kind of pressures there are from the White House and whether there is that much pressure. It really remains to be seen.
And Jeremy, I do want to turn to you and ask, what does Netanyahu hope to gain out of his meeting with the U.S. president?
Well, I think he obviously will want to clarify a number of things in the 21-point plan. I think he will want to elicit some American guarantees in the event that some of the provisions are not respected. To what extent can America guarantee their implementation? I think he'll want to understand exactly, and maybe Ruthie's right about the fact that he ordered, let's say, requested Trump to come out against annexation. Let's not forget, in 2020, he had, as he mentioned, there was the Abraham Accords on one hand and the plans of annexation on the other, and he chose in the end to go for the Abraham Accords. And I've actually said this in previous interviews that I think, we're not past that point irretrievably, and he might still go for the normalization possibility. So I think that, it'll be important to understand what exactly is the meaning of what the president said. Does that mean any annexation at all? What does it mean about the future of E1 that was recently announced and told by Smotrich that this is meant to bury the possibility of a Palestinian state? I think these are the sort of things that he'll want to gauge from the president. I can imagine, usually in conversations like this, having served in Washington, that the issue of the Israeli-American military relationship, in my understanding, there are still this is an ongoing war, which means the use of much equipment and resupply lines. So I would imagine that this is also intelligence sharing. A lot of these issues are somewhere always in these conversations. So I think that's one of the things that I think he'll want to come out of the meeting. But in the end, I think he'll want to come out of the meeting showing that there's a strong Israeli-American partnership and that he has garnered a substantial amount of American support in his next moves. Does he want it to be an immediate end to the war? I don't think so. And I think that would be one of the elements of trying to get some more time out of Trump for him to finish everything he wants to finish in Gaza.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So a lot of issues still on the table. And of course, we hope at least that a lot will be more clear after this meeting with U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday. We are almost out of time. We're about to wrap up, but I do want to hear your final thoughts on Netanyahu's speech at the UN. Ruthie, let's start with you.
Okay, well, what I believe is that whatever else they're talking about, including the 20-point plan, 21-point plan, et cetera, one thing is clear, and we all say it, left, right, and center in Israel and America, other than the anti-Semites, is the hostages have to come home, all right? So, and to say we all want to end the war, this business of, we've got to end it now. We all want to end the war, but some of us believe we can't end it without victory. And part of victory is getting every single hostage back home. And if that doesn't happen, listen, even President Trump says it, it's all well and good to talk about the end and what we're going to do the day after. But Hamas is not agreeing to anything. And if Hamas is still holding the hostages and won't release them, of course, it's not in Hamas's interest to do so, then we're going to be back right where we started before the 21-point plan.
Absolutely. And Jeremy, turning to you for final thoughts on Netanyahu's speech and his upcoming visit at the White House.
Well, I think we can agree that I mean, I hope we're on the morning of a process by which we can end the war. I frankly, as an Israeli citizen, find it so difficult to wake up in the morning and hear that another soldier has been killed. It's just, it's been 2 years, and I am not a liberal person just wanting, but I think this is a long process. It's taken a lot out of the Israeli people, and I think this is something that we need to move towards. And I again stress the need to free all the hostages. Now, one of the last things I'd like to say is that there's one thing in the Ruthie mentioned the word victory, one thing actually I will shock everyone and say that I actually agreed with Netanyahu, and that was in January. Israel actually, in my opinion, we had crushed Hamas, we had crushed Hezbollah, we'd pretty much negated the Houthi threat, we'd foiled two massive Iranian missile attacks. This is last year. And on top of everything, in December of last year, the Assad regime fell. In my opinion, this was a strategic victory that I think at the time we should have declared. In any event, we didn't declare it, and I think there's a danger that as long as the war continues, we will unwind a lot of these military gains. And all I want is that this strategic strength of Israel be translated into a reality, a new reality for Israel and its neighbors in the Middle East, for greater stability, that we can look forward to a situation where we're no longer burying our people or burying any other people either. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy. Thank you, Ruthie, for joining us today. Thank you both for your analysis. And of course, we will continue to cover Netanyahu's visit in the United States. Now, for those just joining, I want to give a very quick recap of Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's address to the UN General Assembly. He actually started out with talking about the Islamic Republic of Iran and talked a little bit about Israel's achievements since October 7th against Hamas, against Hezbollah, against the Assad regime in Syria, and of course the historic strike on Iran. He also talked about October 7th. He said that much of the world has forgotten about October 7th, but Israel still remembers. And what Netanyahu did was ahead of his speech, he instructed the IDF to give to put speakers all along Gaza Strip, and then he spoke directly to the hostages, telling them that Israel will not stop until they are all returned home. He also spoke directly to the Gazan people, told them to free the hostages now, and said that if Hamas lays down its weapons and releases the hostages, the war would end. He also revealed a startling statistic. 90% of Palestinians supported October 7th. And of course, he did not hold back against Western leaders and their recognitions of Palestinian statehood. Let's take a quick look at some of his comments.
These are the people you want to give a state to? What you're doing is giving the ultimate reward to intolerant fanatics who perpetrated and supported the October 7th massacre. Giving the Palestinians a state 1 mile from Jerusalem after October 7th is like giving Al-Qaeda a state 1 mile from New York City after September 11th. This is sheer madness. It's insane, and we won't do it. So here's
just a little snippet from Netanyahu's speech at the UN General Assembly. And of course, we will continue here at ILTV to cover Netanyahu's trip. On Monday, he's scheduled to meet with U.S. President Donald Trump. So still a lot ahead of us in the coming days. I'm Lidar Greve-Lazi. This has been ILTV special broadcast. Thank you so much for joining us.